Hi, welcome to Mantra Voice. My name is Tallulah Breslin, she, her pronouns.
I'm Fiona Barnhill, she, her pronouns.
Welcome. Today, our guest is Dr. Lauren Farwell, who uses she, her pronouns as well, and she is a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in psychological and neuropsychological evaluations and forensic psychology. Dr. Farwell does a deep dive during evaluations to help you understand your experiences, struggles, and strengths to help you navigate what's next for you towards wellness, productivity, and life satisfaction. As a gender affirming voice coach, I do a lot with helping people with that one little piece of their transition, but I know the whole transition umbrella takes a lot of pieces coming together. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Farwell, to talk about your role and what you know about helping this process be as smooth as possible.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Tell me a little bit about what has brought you to become a psychologist. What is your interest in the field, and why are you in particular interested in doing more assessments than therapy?
Great questions. I initially wanted to go into medicine and become a surgeon. And I love studying the brain, I love studying the body. But I also realized that for me, I wanted to understand and heal not just the physical, but also the emotional and the cognitive. And that's what got me initially into psychology. And I'm also theoretically, I practice from a family systems model, and I love seeing how individuals adapt, grow, change, are impacted by their environment, others, etc. I also love science and data and numbers, and evaluations gave me a chance to meld those loves of wanting to help and understand people, translate their experiences in a way that they understand what's actually going on and what's impacting them, both positively and negatively, and also use science and data and informed approaches to help understand those things and not have it be just on a hunch or, oh, you check these boxes for symptoms, so therefore you need to do this. I realize there's so much going on beneath the surface, and it's really cool to be able to see just how people process information, how they collate data in their head, how they make sense of their world, and how accurate or inaccurate that can be depending on whether or not they are feeling anxious or depressed or have other things going on, such as trauma or other outside issues, relationship struggles, etc. So it's really cool being able to meld, kind of like if you will, in like the movie Iron Man, where he just kind of puts all the data together. And that for me is a really cool way to help integrate everything and help really get a good picture of who this person is and what would be helpful going forward so they can lead their best, most productive and fulfilling life.
Quality of life is very important. I appreciate that answer. So, I know from my work that I do with gender affirming voice training that I really feel like the work I'm doing isn't correcting some sort of disorder or problem, and more building somebody's tools to help them have their voice match them. So, how do you fit into the transition process? Do you view the mental health aspect as necessary to transition, that this is a disorder that needs to be treated, or is it more an add-on service that is helpful? What role do you see yourself in that process?
I get to help people know more about who they are, for better, for worse. When we know more about ourselves and we know more of that things that we don't know, we can make change. We can be effective. We can target those areas with the right skills and the right interventions. I remember just in my athletic training, having coaches correct me and say, hey, we've diagnosed the problem. Here's what needs to be done. And I'm thinking, wow, had they not watched what I was doing, I'm a volleyball player, so watch my arm swing, watch my defensive position, they wouldn't have known how to best help and how to best correct and how to best realign my performance so that I can do things more effectively so I can be more effective. And I think where that translates in my work is that I get to be a partner in the multidisciplinary team of helping people become their best them and their most authentic them. And it's so surprising and enlightening whenever I get to work with an individual and do an evaluation, because there's so many things that the individual has already uncovered, but it's also, there's lots of things that they go, oh, I also didn't know that those things interacted in those ways. So even just having that, the pieces are still there and the components are still there, but let's understand things in a more rich and nuanced way, and how this all relates back to some of the struggles they're having, and what their perception is versus what we call performance-based tests results say, can really help add an extra layer to complement and inform the more of what should be focused on and what is being effective. We also can see response to intervention in testing to see, and we can see people who have already done a lot of really great work on their mental health, and we can see, well, yeah, we've kind of reached this next step. Let's go on to the next chapter, the next mode, the next advanced skill set to build. So it's really, can be really reaffirming, where people go, wow, you've seen me, you've seen the whole me, and I get to help them go, yeah, this is working. This is, this is something that might be a little more challenging, and here's some skills that you might benefit from. And of course, these are all suggestions and recommendations. The client's the expert to me on their life, and I get a chance to be part of it and help illuminate those things that may not be immediately obvious and impactful.
If somebody is considering going through transition, how would they know whether the right next step for them is to go pursue talking to a psychologist versus to go directly into pursuing the transition steps that aren't a part of mental health care?
Honestly, I think first off, everyone would benefit from mental health care, whether in whatever stages of life. I think if nothing else, I see mental health as someone who is not part of the outside world system, somebody who is, has no stake in the game other than, I want this person to be their best and most fulfilled and congruent self. So I think there's definitely benefits to it. I think in some sense, just having someone to talk to about these emotionally charged at times issues and not worry about getting biased feedback or perspective. I also know that from a lens of a mental health practitioner, there are just things that I'm listening for and that I'm picking up on, and themes, and also coming in and not knowing this person's history other than what they're telling me and what the data tells me gives me a unique perspective on how to be helpful and how to inform things. And again, sometimes, and especially folks who come to my office who identify, on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, have already really begun the work. And so it's really reaffirming to go, great, help catch me up, and let's do a deeper dive to see where we can help you be more effective. I think in the process of gender transition, I think in terms of just making sure that there are supports. I mean, if you think about it, there's so many different things that go into identity and how you are with self, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, interpersonally, socially, how you see the world, how you interact with your environment. I think because of just the amount of change that is happening, even to the most well-adjusted person, I know for myself, my rule is that if there's 2 or more changes going on in my own life, I need to make sure that I'm stopping and taking more deep breaths as well. And I can imagine that when that's identity related, that would be even more so important.
After starting my own transition and taking hormones, just looking at other people's experiences, I've started to notice a trend among people starting hormone replacement therapy is that they tend to start questioning if they're really transgender. I know I went through the same process, but do you have any thoughts on why this happens?
Well, I think any change should make us question the process of things. I think when we change anything, and especially with, gender transition, I mean, we're changing our outward, inward, social, the way, I mean, we're changing pretty much everything. And when we change and we have things become less of a thought and more of a reality, less mentalized and more concrete, we're going to be interacting with our world and ourself and others in a different way. And I think it's 100% healthy to question those choices and take a step back and understand your identity and yourself in a different way. I mean, I think that's how we kind of rebuild and grow and start to really see, well, am I on the right track? Am I not? And I also think that questioning is important, because at the end of the day, when we question it and we look at, the old fashioned like pros and cons list for things, we can then make some really productive and astounding decisions and take a really firm stand. It's, I kind of see it as a more scientific approach. It's because we don't want to have the confirmatory bias. We have to look at all the, well, wait, am I doing the right thing? Because then you can really then trust going forward who you are, what you're about. And I know as an athlete myself, I've had to question that, on a definitely smaller scale, my identity in positive, negative ways. When I've gotten injured, it's like, does this mean I'm not an athlete? No, it just means I get to, do a little aftercare after a game and put more ice on things and warm up a little bit more. When we can kind of accept what that is and realign and readjust what is, then we can really make powerful decisions about our lives, our choices, and everything. So I think it's actually a really good thing when people start to question, because then that means they're thinking critically about things and they're open to feedback and they're open to discovering more about who that true, authentic self is. Like when you go to the store and you try on clothing or shoes, or, you're trying a new hairstyle or anything new. I mean, you buy new food. I mean, you're trying it on and you're giving yourself a chance to get it out of your head and into real life, where you get to really interact with it. And I think that's really when we get to grow and learn and really experience ourselves in a different way.
You brought up a lot of interesting points there. I know something that I've come across is when I am working with transmasculine individuals, they did have a lifetime before they decided to transition where they were receiving all of the messages about what it is that they should look like, how they should stand, how they should speak. And one of the interesting ways that that's manifested is in the flat stomach. So their mom might have said, hold your stomach in. And that's a message that tends to be given to women in our society more than men. And so then when they transitioned, they were still trying to hold their stomach in, which affected their breathing. There's all sorts of little subtle ways that these things manifest. I think as a parent, there are things that maybe our society has led us to think that it's helpful to say to our kids, but we know that assigned sex at birth and gender identity are two separate concepts that can occur in any combination. So when you're raising a child, how do you know what is the right way to introduce gender? How do you treat your children in a way that won't influence them later in life to make choices that aren't their own?
Mm-hmm. I honestly, it makes me think of attachment theory. And when you have a secure attachment to your parent, anything's possible. And I think a lot of these things start with the conversation and kids just knowing that their parent is a safe place to ask these questions, and hearing parents try on mirroring, expressing language that is inclusive can have that sense of safe space. And, and kids pick up on so many things. And, I've talked with youth that say, yeah, my parents say that they're safe, but they're dead naming one of my friends, or they're using derogatory language and that they don't know is derogatory, but that is considered offensive in the trans community, and those kinds of things. And when you would ask those parents, they'd say, oh gosh, no, that's me trying to be inclusive and I just don't understand, and how am I supposed to know, and all the excuses and such. And I think when kids know that they're safe, they're hearing those things without people trying, or they're seeing their parent, for example, make a mistake and back up and use the correct pronouns, for example. And I remember doing an interview, initial interview with a youth and their parent, and mom had used the wrong pronoun and immediately changed. They, and then went on, and the child just brightened and just said, oh, wow, yes, they see me and they're trying. And so I think it's less about what are the nuts and bolts, which are also important. But if you know your child and you're creating a safe space for them to have the conversation. And by the way, having the safe space for children to come talk to their parents about anything you want your children communicating with you about things. So this kind of hits a couple of different avenues as well. But when kids feel safe and supported, and they feel like they can come and talk to you about things, and that they hear you using language that is inclusive and is compassionate and is connecting, and also seizing those opportunities to explain about various phenomenon and normalizing it. And I had a friend that went to a drag queen storybook hour, and her child was like, oh my gosh, I want to go because the lady wears rainbows, and I don't know what drag is, but she looks very pretty. And my friend got to explain to her daughter about what drag is and what transgender is and the LGBTQIA phenomenon. She said, oh my gosh, this is really cool, and I can be and do whatever I want and who I am, and I can be my authentic self. And Mom's like, well, yeah, I mean, yes, because that's you. It was just really reaffirming to hear that. And I'm going, can I just clone you and have every parent be that way? So I think some of it starts with just the connection and the conversation.
Yeah, and sometimes we come across like friends and family who want to love and support us, but they don't know how, or they find it hard through to just a variety of reasons. And I was wondering if you knew any ways that they can maybe work on it or move past this block.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of good education, first off, out there. I know I've done quite a bit of work with Out Youth in our community to not just work with creating a community for the LGBTQIA plus children and youth. I believe their age limit is up to 23. So, but there's also family support programs where parents can get together and talk about things. There's education, there's resources, even just, having access to a number of different avenues to talk about those things in terms of, and the thing is too, there's also, for a lot of parents, there's the grief and loss piece too of, yes, I love my child, and yes, I will call them their chosen name and their pronouns, and I embrace their trans identity. And I also want to have this space to go, well, this is the identity that I've known, kind of like with what we talked about before with the trying on something and feeling happy, but also the sense of shame. This is a systemic situation too. So this is also where mental health can come into play, where parents are making sure that they're getting their own supports and their own avenues. I think sometimes it becomes the parents are processing their grief with their trans child. And it's kind of like, when a romantic relationship ends, like when the ex wants to process the grief with the ex, and it's like, there's better ways to do that. So I always like to recommend to parents resources. Read up on this, read blogs, read articles, talk to people, have conversations, meet up with a supportive group that can facilitate those conversations. and also to help confront some of those things where, yes, I know you might want to still call your child by, the name you gave them at birth, but how not only is that not, it's not an optional thing, but it's also could be harmful. And I also think bridging those gaps to, hey, there is the trans experience, and then here's your trans child's experience, to have that conversation piece and bridge that back, which can always be reaffirming. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good resources. There's a lot of groups that people are running for various, family members and community resources that are out there to help educate and further the conversation.
Now, I noticed that going back to like how hormones change the brain, that some doctors and surgeons say that you need to be on hormones for at least 2 years and living as your preferred gender before they'll even do any affirming surgery. Do
Mhm.
you have any opinion about that, or is it necessary for people to go through that?
It's interesting whenever I hear like a seemingly arbitrary time period, like 2 years. I mean, my first question is, well, what happens at 1 year and 11 months? And I think for fidelity and integrity, and also I think some of these guidelines are more for the practitioners than they are for the individual who is planning gender affirming surgery. I think that given how biological processes work, and I think how things change, I mean, I know with a lot of psychiatric medications, for example, it takes a couple months to build up in your body and have you experience yourself in that way. And sometimes we see that those things are working. Sometimes we see adverse side effects. Sometimes we see people who adapt and need to kind of titrate up a little bit. Sometimes medications such as like Lamictal, for example, you need to start at a very low dose and slowly titrate up, or else you're going to have specific side effects. So I think some of it is from a medical perspective, just to make sure that everything is responding the way that it is, that it should, to monitor for adverse side effects. I think the 2 year mark is, I think it's arbitrary, but I think on some level for practitioners who aren't as well versed or think they, don't know what they don't know, that can be a piece of integrity for the medical community. I don't know that it would take the full 2 years. And Fiona, you can probably speak to this from a more lived experience part, but I know from a biological and an emotional and a just, a trying on this new way of being and getting accustomed to this. I mean, I also know that too many changes at once can also cause a lot of anxiety and distress too. So some of it is taking those steps and making sure that we can highlight any side effects or any ill effects of what are happening, and also to teach skills on how to tolerate some of those things. I remember working with a trans male who was like, oh wow, guess I'm going through a second puberty right now, and this is kind of hard to manage some of those things. And he said he was really glad that he was taking things just one step at a time. And I think on some level the time can feel a little bit of oppressive, and like 2 years seems like a long time, although we've almost been in the pandemic for 2 years. And I don't know, some days it seems like it's whizzed by and some days it seems like forever. But I think it also can be a positive thing for folks to go, hey, you can take your time with this. This isn't, and I think though, when it feels like it's on somebody else's timeline, that can be a struggle too. I do know that there's a lot of time that's just needed to have things working optimally and to tweak the hormones, medications, any sort of physiological things, if there's underlying health issues that need to be monitored as well. And also just in terms of just the getting used to what those changes are. And it's like it's coming from, it's not being mentalized anymore. It's actually real and in real life, and just getting used to those various things. So while 2 years might be arbitrary, I can see the value in having, an extended an extended time period beyond just like one month, just to give oneself the opportunity to make sure that, there's no ill effects. I've known people that have had some pretty ill effects from various hormones, whether it be birth control, HRT, testosterone, they've had thyroid issues. So I think just, from a safety perspective, that's usually where I would reframe that with my clients and go, it's okay to take your time, and we can develop some coping strategies to help align those parts, or understand, or give some self-compassion to those parts of us that are still kind of catching up. So yeah.
You brought up a lot with self-care there. I think that's really valuable. One of the things that I have seen some surgeons, well, many surgeons often require before gender affirming surgeries, is that there be a period of time prior to surgery that no smoking of tobacco occurs. And I've seen myself in voice work that clients who smoke have a particularly challenging time with, right? If your throat is irritated and you cough when you try to do voice work, that makes it really challenging to work on your voice. I have a really good question here from Brooke. Can neuropsychology help one to stop smoking by finding out about what drives it from the brain? And I'd love any sort of tips, because I know sometimes not smoking is part of the process of transitioning, and anything that will help people along that path would be really useful to know.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's the field of hypnosis that's evolved to help with smoking cessation, and I think even just understanding like what the addiction is, what it does to your body, what it does to your mind, what it does to, and it's interesting. I've heard a lot of interesting things about smoking, where someone will say, "Well, I don't understand why they keep worrying about my heart rate up and all this stuff. I feel relaxed after I smoke a cigarette, or I vape or whatnot." And actually, we're actually in the withdrawal cycle, where the person is going through withdrawals from smoking or from nicotine. Then they smoke and they feel relaxed, and even just understanding like some of those, what is happening and why is this important. I will also say, having worked in addiction treatment, that nicotine and smoking is one of the hardest things to quit. And I think some of using the strategies, and there's a lot of good medications out there that have been shown to help with smoking cessation. There's, but I also know that from a mental health perspective, some of that is the supporting and having the reminders of the reasons of why we're going to do this, having some self-calming, soothing strategies, having some, mindfulness. I know biofeedback is a really good strategy that is offered to be able to forge that mind-body connection. But I think there's a lot of different things that can be accessed for smoking cessation. And I also know that it's progress, not perfection. So there is going to be, some hiccups along the way and such. But I do know, even just making people aware of what that is, why it's harmful, finding that investment to stop, if for whatever period of time, why that's important. I also think people are told a lot in our society. I mean, this is kind of the telling kids to do something because I said so mentality. I think when people really understand the why this is important, and then we can stave off some of that self-will, and also that anger, that resentment, that depression of, hey, this is something that I'm giving up. I mean, to do this, and it's worth it. So I think finding as many supports as you can. But yeah, there's lots of good resources for smoking cessation, support for that in our field.
I recently presented at a conference on the ways that I use geek therapy, basically play therapy for adults, in my own voice training work, and I've had a lot of really good results with D&D style roleplay, not where we do a whole spectrum of a game and a DM, but just using that roleplay aspect when we're working on our voice to be able to sort of separate from this is my voice versus this is a voice, and try out things in vocal play in ways that aren't necessarily so attached to our identity, which can be pretty useful. I think this idea of community building is really important. And I've noticed a phenomenon where individuals will transition, and then unfortunately, not everyone in their life will be supportive. And they'll be in a situation where they feel like they need to make a choice between having interactions with people who are misgendering them or actively saying that they don't support them versus sort of like losing interacting with that person who's been part of their life for a long time. How do you recommend balancing that sort of not losing connections while also not having interactions that are really challenging?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that reminds me of the dialectical behavioral therapy strategy of boundary setting, and I think some of that it really comes into play when we are rebuilding and honoring our true identities and our authentic self. And I think when we know why we need to set those limits, we can do that with love and with grace and honoring the relationship. And I think sometimes that can be tricky because it is a hot button and it is evocative. It's not like somebody's telling me that I like cauliflower when I can't stand cauliflower and I don't have an emotional connection to it unless I'm hungry. Then we're going to have some problems if you throw that down with me. But you're misgendering and you're calling somebody by a name that's not theirs, and that can be harmful. And I think there's ways to set healthy boundaries to where, yes, there's some things that we can say and do and interact, but hey, I'm going to have to bow out if you start misgendering me. And I think even just the asserting one's worth and setting the boundaries, and we don't set boundaries to keep people out or keep people in. We set boundaries so that we can have a relationship. And this is why, for example, we have fences, between our neighbors. Well, some people do. Other people have just a free roam backyard. But we set boundaries, so that my neighbor and myself can interact effectively, and our dogs don't have to meet if we don't want them to, and that they have their space and I have mine, and we know where the other ends and the other begins. And so when setting boundaries, I think that's part of it, is the reminder of, I want to honor this relationship, and this may not be where this person is right now, and they may not be in a place where they are supporting me, and I can both keep myself safe and also have a level of engagement with them that honors the relationship and honors both of us, while trying out new identities, new facets of myself, new groups, new ways of being, new interests. Who knew that I would enjoy gardening in the pandemic? Like, it was, I've never been able to keep a plant alive, but now here we are. And I think even creating that openness to, the current relationships can be honored. And just because you're trying on new things doesn't mean you're throwing out the old and it's all new. Because I think there is that level of, and especially if there's no harm being caused, and there's, again, that's a whole different situation. I'd say don't interact with those folks. But yeah, I think there's a way to have all of that mesh well, and the idea of boundaries comes up, and setting healthy boundaries with your engagement with all of it, to make sure that everyone gets to grow and be who they are in a safe space.
I appreciate your advocacy for cauliflower because I know on a ketogenic diet, I eat a lot of it. And gardening is a really lovely thing. I think that many of us have learned how to keep plants alive in the pandemic who hadn't necessarily put a lot of energy into that before. I grew up with my mom growing most of the vegetables that we ate. So I had a lot of exposure to gardening growing up, but I didn't do it myself until the pandemic. And it was pretty exciting to learn that, I could have fresh herbs because if I watered them every day, they didn't die. Texas, we get a lot of heat. So one of the things that you mentioned with what you were talking about with community was sort of those boundary settings in the home. And I know that one of the more challenging situations that my clients have described is when they don't have an option besides living in their home, or if they make the option not to live in their home, it's going to cause a lot more challenges. But
Mm-hmm.
because their family is not as far along in the acceptance path, it can be a situation where maybe they aren't able to dress as their authentic self, aren't able to use their voice as their authentic self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they even have challenges to accessing medical care, which is a situation which makes it a lot more difficult to sort of have healthy boundaries because the other side is so involved in where the boundaries will be. Do you have any advice for individuals who are in those types of situations?
Yeah, and I think for those folks, it's first off acknowledging the situation for what is, and what are those points where they can push back safely, what are those places they can, you know, they can be more authentic, and also recognizing and acknowledging those limitations, because there's definitely and this reminds me of, and this is going to sound weird, but I'm going with it. It reminds me of my work in hospice years ago, where there's the aggressive, like curative approach, and then there's the palliative, or the let's be comfortable, let's be, let's stop the fight, and let's keep somebody comfortable, let's keep them in a place where we can manage the pain. And it's a very different approach. And I think when we know where we're in the curative versus the palliative approach at home, and knowing what we can fight, what we are wasting our energies on, I think staying connected with something and someone that is affirming is especially important. I mean, the attachment literature says you only need one secure attachment figure. You only need one person to get you. And even if there's a school counselor, if it's a friend, if it's an online community, which is one of the benefits of growing up these days. Well, it's also one of the negatives too, but one of the benefits is that there is such a vast community of people in the world that that can connect with each other. So I think having those lifelines, if you will, and also being able to go, okay, and revisit that. I know in therapy with my trans individual clients, we explore a lot of the, hey, what's static and what's dynamic, what can change versus what is, what are we choosing for right now that has to just happen. Like I'm 15, 16 and 100% reliant on my parents, versus I'm 19 and I'm in college. What are my options? And also, can I tolerate it making things more challenging, like being more independent? Like, is that possible without compromising other parts of my functioning? And I think, like old ladies dumping out their purses and just having it all out on the table, it's like, let's see it all, what is, what isn't, what's possible, what's not, what we might need to just put on hold for right now. And I think even having a placeholder part, and knowing that this is hey, this can't be changed right now, and that's okay, and we can come back to that. That may just mean that there's more lifelines out there, and more conversations with people that are affirming, and also involvement with your own interests and things that build you up and things that give you purpose. In addition to that, can also help also help people cope more effectively.
That is so helpful. I know that I think on a sort of general level, I know that people who have gone to the level of pursuing a doctoral degree have a depth of knowledge from that study, but I really appreciate you sharing that knowledge today. It made me even more aware how much you know, which is really useful when we're trying to do things like come up with diagnoses and map our minds and figure out what will help us most. I know you have really exciting things going on in your own professional life these days. Do you want to share your news?
Yes, I am actually transitioning from closing my initial practice that I started right out of graduate school, and I'm opening up a new practice called Meet Your Mind, and it really embodies the principles of what I, from a professional standpoint, but from a personal standpoint as well. I think meeting your mind and aligning all that with who you are and being congruent and having that knowledge and having things come from a place of authenticity and having a more improved sense of self can really help people not just embrace their strengths, but also use those things to offset their areas of struggle and help navigate away from guilt and shame and negative self-perception to a place of this is the balance of who I am, and I can honor all that is. And I'm especially grateful for professionals like yourself that I've gotten a chance to work with. And my goal is to expand my practice and be able to provide more, the quality mental health services, particularly with focusing on psychological and neuropsych assessments. I'm also newly contracted with Williamson County Juvenile Probation, and I enjoy doing neuropsych and psychological assessments for them too. So that's part of the Meet Your Mind umbrella, as well as getting to serve the juvenile justice youth and be able to provide for them. And from a place of, in terms of access to healthcare, there's a lot of folks that I've seen that have not been able to access quality mental health care and medical care if not for the juvenile system. So that especially warms my heart that I get to provide that for folks that may not otherwise have access to that. So I'm grateful of where my professional and personal journey has gotten me, and I'm looking forward to the what's next. And also going to set some good, healthy boundaries with my own self-care too, and make sure that I practice what I preach.
Yeah, self-care is very important. I think that when we start on our own journeys, professional, independent businesses, there can be a lot of things that come up that maybe nobody thought to mention to us or that were not expected in any way. So I appreciate your self-care, and I hope that your new journey into your new independent business goes really well. I'm excited. I love everything that you've shared here today. What is the best ways for our listeners to get in touch with you?
You can go to my website and there will be contact options there. You can send just a message through the portal. It is www.meetyourmindatx.com. That's meetyourmindatx.com.
Great. Thank you so much. And I appreciate both you, Dr. Farwell, and Fiona joining me today. Again, I am Tallulah Breslin with Mantra of Voice, where we help you love your voice. Our specialty is gender affirming voice training, but we do recognize that there is a lot of pieces to the transition process. So I so appreciate being able to bring these different perspectives from other talented medical professionals to help you on your journey. And thank you for tuning in. Have a lovely day. Remember to like, subscribe, and click that bell so you get notifications. Mantra Voice, your personal guide to loving your voice. I'm Tallulah Breslin. See you next time.